They always said only special people are chosen to carry the weight of a family. I used to believe I was one of them, until that day. The light in the dining room felt colder than usual. Late afternoon shadows crept along the floor, outlining the silence that had fallen after my question. The curtains danced softly with the wind, but nothing moved in me. I was frozen. Not because of the chill, but because of my son's words. I had just asked Matthew, calmly, why he filed for guardianship over me. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just stared at me like I was a stranger. "You don't even know what day it is." And the room froze. Emily stopped flipping through the folder in her lap. My sister-in-law, who'd flown in just for this, stopped sipping her tea. Even the old grandfather clock behind me paused between ticks, or at least it felt like it did. Matthew's words didn't just hit me, they branded me. I was sitting at the head of my own dining table. Mahogany, polished weekly. A table where I had once served Thanksgiving dinners for 10. And I suddenly felt like a guest, or worse, a burden. My eyes drifted to the silver bracelet around my wrist, a gift from my late husband, engraved inside with the words, "Always steady, always Mom." It had always made me feel safe. Today it cut into my skin like a lie. My lips parted, but no words came out, because the truth was, I did know what day it was, or at least, I thought I did. It was Thursday, wasn't it? The 17th? But Matthew's gaze told me I was wrong, not just about the date, about everything. That single sentence. It turned years of sacrifice into suspicion. All the nights I stayed awake waiting for them to come home safe. The jobs I juggled to put them through college. The times I put off buying medication for myself so they could have what they needed. It all vanished with one cold accusation. "You don't even know what day it is." He had already filed, with the court. He had gone behind my back, gathered papers, spoken to lawyers, and now sat across from me. Not as my son, but as someone who believed I was no longer fit to live my own life. And I could see it in their eyes. They weren't going to stop at this. If I didn't do something, they would take everything. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my bedroom, the door shut, the hallway light slipping in through the crack like a silent intruder. My body felt heavy, like I was wearing every year of motherhood as armor. And yet, I'd never felt so defenseless. I pulled the old cedar box from under my bed, the one where I kept the things that still reminded me who I was before all of this. Inside was the blue silk dress I had bought for Emily's graduation ceremony, the one she never invited me to, still with the tag, still smelling faintly of hope. Next to it, wrapped in tissue, was a small gift I'd prepared for Matthew's 40th birthday, a watch engraved with, "To the man you've become." It cost me more than I should have spent. I'd been saving it, waiting for the right moment. But I never got the chance to give it to him. He told me not to come that day, said it would be too much for me. I held the gift in my hands and tried to measure everything I had given up. Not just money, though the list was long. Over $74,000 spent on college tuition, $2,500 on car repairs and down payments. They couldn't make $18,000 loaned and never returned. But that wasn't what hurt. What really left scars were the invisible sacrifices. Like the weekends I stayed home so they could go on trips. Like the doctor's appointments I skipped to babysit their kids. Like the medication I halved so I could buy school supplies. And now they were building a case against me, using my age, my memory, my occasional confusion as ammunition. They were collecting my missteps like evidence at a crime scene. Papers I'd misplaced, names I'd forgotten once or twice, a time I left the stove on for too long. Little things, human things. I held the dress to my chest, and for the first time in a long time, I cried. Not the quiet, polite tears of a woman who's trying to keep her dignity, the kind that shake your bones. Because I realized something. They hadn't just decided I needed help. They had decided I didn't matter anymore. And if they could erase me this easily, what else were they capable of? 2 days later, I tried to speak with them. I invited Matthew and Emily back to the house. Not to argue, but to talk, to understand, to maybe find a way back to the people we used to be. I even made coffee, just like I used to when they were kids and brought home bad report cards or broken hearts. My hands trembled as I set the mugs down. I wore the cardigan they'd given me for Mother's Day years ago. I thought maybe it would remind them of something, of someone they once loved. But the look on their faces when they arrived told me everything. They weren't coming to listen. "Mom, this isn't about emotions," Matthew said, standing by the fireplace, arms crossed. "It's about protecting you from yourself." "From myself?" I asked. "I've taken care of this family for decades. I raised you. I kept this home together while your father was sick. I gave up everything for you. And now you think I'm dangerous." Emily didn't look at me. She kept scrolling on her phone. Then came the first cruel sentence. "You're not the same anymore," she said flatly. "You repeat stories. You ask the same question twice. Last week you called the dog by Dad's name." My breath caught. That was true. I had. But it was one moment, one slip. "I was tired," I whispered. "I had been up all night. It was one mistake." Matthew stepped forward, voice harder now. "It's not just one mistake. The bank called. You overdrew your account again. The pharmacist said you forgot to pick up your meds 2 months in a row." "That was when I had the flu. I was sick." "And you forgot your granddaughter's birthday," Emily cut in. "Completely." That one hurt the most, because I hadn't forgotten. I had ordered a gift online, a handmade doll from her favorite storybook. But the delivery got delayed, and when I called to explain, no one answered. They didn't want explanations. They wanted control. I tried to reach for the photo frame on the mantel. One of all of us, years ago at the lake, arms around each other, sun in our eyes. But Emily grabbed it first and set it aside like it didn't matter. That was when I realized they weren't afraid for me. They were embarrassed by me. I had become inconvenient. And though they smiled, spoke softly, and used words like love and safety, I could see it now. They had already made up their minds. This wasn't a conversation. This was a quiet war. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my checkbook. For years, I had sent them little helping hand transfers. $200 here, $500 there. Car repairs, daycare bills, sudden emergencies. I never asked for anything back. Love doesn't keep receipts. That's what I used to believe. But love also shouldn't come with terms like guardianship. My hands didn't shake this time. I opened my online banking app, went into the recurring payments tab, and canceled every automatic transfer I had set up for Matthew and Emily. Then, I went a step further. I closed the joint savings account I had opened with Emily, the one she used just in case of emergencies. No one noticed. Until an hour later. My phone started buzzing. First a message from Matthew. "Did you change the accounts? Call me, now." Then Emily. "Mom, what is going on? This is really petty and concerning." I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out a manila folder I had buried in the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside were the medical reports I'd collected over the last year. Blood work, neurologist visits, cognitive assessments. I hadn't shown them to my children because, frankly, I didn't think I needed to. But now I realized I might have to prove to the people I raised that I was still of sound mind. At noon, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole. It was Emily. Alone. I opened the door cautiously. She didn't smile. "We need to talk. Now." I stepped aside, letting her in. She went straight to the kitchen, pulling out a chair like it was still her home. Like I was the guest now. "You're making things worse," she said. "This little tantrum. It's only proving the point." I sat down slowly, placing the folder on the table between us. "I'm not having a tantrum," I said. "I'm protecting myself." She glanced at the folder but didn't open it. "You're acting paranoid." "No," I said louder than I meant to. "I'm acting like someone who's finally realizing her children don't trust her anymore." She looked at me, eyes cold. "We're doing this because we love you." I shook my head. "No, you're doing this because it's easier to take control than it is to have faith." For a moment she didn't speak. Then she stood up, grabbed her purse, and said the words that made my spine go rigid. "If you won't cooperate, we'll do this legally." And just like that, she left. I stared at the closed door for a long time, and I knew this was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a battle. The first sign that things were escalating came 3 days later. A white SUV pulled into my driveway just after 9 a.m. I watched from the upstairs window, heart pounding. Matthew stepped out, not alone. He was with a woman I didn't recognize, maybe mid-30s, in a navy blazer and heels too sharp for my gravel walkway. She held a briefcase and moved with the kind of confidence that said she wasn't here for tea. I barely had time to fix my cardigan before the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Matthew didn't smile. "This is Rebecca Whitman," he said. "She's a family legal advisor. We're here to go over some documentation." I blinked. "Documentation for what?" Rebecca gave a rehearsed smile. "Mrs. Whitmore, we're pursuing guardianship on behalf of your children, for your protection. But before the court gets involved, it's often helpful to do a voluntary review of your assets and medical history." My heart dropped. "You want to go through my papers? In my home?" "It's standard procedure," she said calmly. "You can refuse, of course, but it may not reflect well later." I looked at Matthew. "You're okay with this?" He didn't answer. I stepped aside, not out of agreement, but out of shock. They walked past me like guests at a showing, eyes scanning photos, furniture, the cluttered counter near the fridge. Rebecca pulled out a legal pad. "We'll start with financials. Do you have statements from the past year?" I went to retrieve a few folders from the study, hands numb. But as I handed them over, I said, "You won't find anything you don't already know." "That's what we're hoping," she replied. She wasn't smiling anymore. They stayed for over an hour. They asked about my medication routine, my bills, my passwords. Rebecca took notes like I was a subject, a risk assessment. When I hesitated, she said, "It's important that we verify you're able to maintain independence." At one point, Matthew asked for the deed to the house. "The house?" I echoed. "We just want to make sure it's in good order," he said. I stared at him. "You mean you want to see if it's in your name already?" He looked away. That night, I locked my doors for the first time in years. And I didn't sleep. Again. Because they weren't just poking around. They were building a case, and they were coming for my home, my autonomy, everything. What terrified me most? They might actually win. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I called a lawyer. Not someone from a billboard, someone I trusted. Benjamin Carr had been my neighbor for over 20 years before he moved to a smaller place outside Boulder after his wife passed. We hadn't spoken in months, maybe a year. But when I explained what was happening, his tone changed instantly. "I'll be there in an hour," he said. He showed up in jeans and a blazer, carrying a worn leather briefcase, and the kind of calm only someone who's seen real storms can offer. His voice was steady, his eyes sharper than ever. I made coffee, and for the first time in weeks my hands didn't shake pouring it. He listened, really listened, to everything. When I finished explaining what Matthew and Emily were doing, the guardianship petition, the financial scrutiny, the surprise visit with the legal advisor, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "They're trying to build a narrative," he said. "If they control the narrative, they control the outcome." I nodded slowly. "And if the court believes them?" "You could lose your rights, your finances, even this house." The room spun a little. I clutched the bracelet on my wrist. "Then I need to fight." Benjamin leaned forward. "Then you need to document everything, every message, every phone call, every conversation. You need a paper trail." He handed me a notebook. "Write down what happened at every visit, what they said, what you felt. Start now. I'll file a counter motion to delay the guardianship hearing and demand a full psychological assessment. On your terms." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a recorder. "And from now on, if they come to the door, you don't answer alone." That afternoon, I sat with a folder of every bank receipt, every prescription list, every doctor's letter. We began organizing it into categories. Benjamin scanned everything into his laptop. He spoke like a man building a defense for a client he believed in, and for the first time I didn't feel like a confused old woman. I felt like a witness preparing for trial. Later that night, as I sat in bed, I opened the notebook and began writing. They think they can erase me, but I remember everything. Because even if I forgot a date or repeated a story, I hadn't forgotten who I was. And now I had someone who hadn't forgotten either. It happened on a Thursday morning. There was a knock, sharp, official. When I opened the door, a woman stood there with a badge and a clipboard. She introduced herself as Lana Briggs from the Colorado Department of Adult Protective Services. "I'm here following a welfare concern submitted by family members," she said politely but firmly. "May I come in?" My breath caught. I stepped aside. She entered, took in the living room, the clean floors, the stack of folded laundry, the books on the table. Everything exactly as I kept it. She walked slowly, observing, noticing how I navigated the space, how I answered her questions. "How have you been feeling lately, Mrs. Whitmore?" "Fine." "Any issues managing medications?" "No." "Do you ever forget appointments, meals, personal hygiene?" "I have a calendar. I write everything down." She jotted notes, her face unreadable. Then came the twist. "I'll also need to speak with you separately again later this week, and someone will be in contact to conduct a full cognitive assessment. It's part of the review." My pulse quickened. "Am I being investigated?" "This is just a wellness check," she said, "to ensure your safety." But I could hear it, the institutional coldness, the assumption built into her tone. They were painting a version of me I didn't recognize, one where my cluttered pantry meant confusion, where my slower steps meant deterioration, where my solitude equaled risk. I offered her tea. She declined. As she left, she handed me a pamphlet. "Understanding Guardianship. Know Your Rights." I stared at it long after she drove away. That evening, Benjamin returned. I told him what happened. He was already 10 steps ahead. Did she take photos? Look at your fridge? Ask about finances? I nodded. She's looking for inconsistencies. Anything that can be interpreted as cognitive decline. He set his bag down and opened a new folder. We need a second opinion, a neutral physician, and we need character statements from neighbors, friends, anyone who's seen you live independently. But what if they don't believe me? I asked. He looked me dead in the eye. Then we give them no choice. Still, as I sat on the couch, the bracelet cold against my wrist, I could feel it. The world around me was shifting, and not in my favor. That Sunday, I visited the cemetery. It had been months since I'd gone. The weather had just turned. Those crisp Colorado mornings where the sky is impossibly blue and the air feels thin, like truth, cuts more easily through it. I brought a single white rose and the bracelet that used to belong to my mother. She'd given it to me the day I turned 50, with trembling hands and a whispered, "You'll understand its weight one day." I understand it now. I sat by my husband's grave, knees aching, heart heavier. "Daniel," I whispered. "They think I'm broken." The trees rustled. It sounded almost like breath. "I gave them everything," I continued. "And now they want to put me in a cage wrapped in soft words like protection and concern. They're building a world where I don't get a vote." I took the bracelet off, held it in my hand. I thought of the birthdays, the holidays, the school plays I never missed, the nights I stayed up, waiting by the window for their headlights. The times I said yes when I wanted to say no, all of it, now seen as weakness, or worse, forgettable. I closed my eyes and said the words I had never dared to say aloud. I deserved to be cared for, not managed, not erased, cared for. And it hit me, not like a wave, but like something small and strong rising quietly in my chest. I hadn't stopped being a mother. They had stopped seeing me as one. I wasn't asking to be worshipped. I wasn't clinging to a throne of memories. I just wanted dignity, respect, the right to choose what happens to me while I'm still breathing. On my way home, I passed a mirror in the hallway and stopped. For the first time in weeks, I looked at myself, not with fear, but with clarity. I saw the lines around my mouth and thought, those are earned. I saw the gray in my hair and thought, that's survival. I looked into my eyes and whispered, I'm still here. Because sometimes the most radical thing an aging woman can say is, I still matter. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to wait for someone to give me permission. I was going to reclaim it. The letter came on a Tuesday. Thick envelope, government seal. My name typed in bold. Inside, a court date, scheduled in less than 4 weeks. Matthew and Emily were accelerating the process. I sat at the kitchen table rereading the pages. Formal, cold. Petition for guardianship due to cognitive incapacity. There it was, in black and white. My children had sworn, under penalty of perjury, that I was no longer fit to make decisions for myself. They were building a legal wall around me, and they were doing it fast. Benjamin arrived that evening, his expression tight. "They're using an emergency clause," he said. "Claiming immediate risk. That means they'll try to present witnesses before we even finish collecting ours." "We have truth," I said. "Isn't that enough?" He looked at me gently, and that was all the answer I needed. The next day, we started making calls. I reached out to my neighbor Janice, who'd known me for 15 years. She agreed to speak on my behalf. So did Tom, the pharmacist I saw every month. until he heard who filed the petition. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said hesitantly, "your daughter already came by, told me you were no longer authorized to pick up certain medications, that your doctor had signed off on it." "What doctor?" I asked, stunned. But he didn't know. He just shrugged. "She had a document, looked official." I hung up, my stomach twisting. Emily had started blocking my access, one step at a time, silently. Then I called the bank. The manager, who once called me by name and remembered my birthday, told me they had already received a request from Matthew to be added as a co-signer on my accounts, without my consent. "They said you were in early stages of dementia," he added gently. "Said it was precautionary." I hung up, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might faint. I wasn't just being accused. I was being erased, in pieces, quietly, legally. When Benjamin returned, I told him everything. He paced the room. "They're orchestrating it well," he said. "One story to each institution. Small lies. Not enough to raise alarm, but just enough to build doubt." He stopped at the window. "If the judge believes them, even for a moment." I sat down, gripping the chair. "What do we do now?" He turned slowly. "Now, we fight with facts, witnesses, reports, and we find someone, anyone, who can testify under oath that you are not what they claim." The loop played in my head again and again. Will the judge believe them? Or me? And right now, I couldn't tell which answer scared me more. The dining room turned into a war room. Piles of folders, medical reports, bank statements, phone logs, all spread out across the mahogany table where we once shared holiday meals. The irony wasn't lost on me. Years ago, I cut Matthew's turkey here. Now, I was defending my sanity at the same table. Benjamin worked tirelessly, his voice calm, but his eyes were storm clouds. "We need to structure this timeline minute by minute," he said, flipping through documents. "Every moment they claim you were unfit, we counter it. Witnesses, receipts, clarity." He handed me a printed email from Janice, my neighbor, who wrote a statement describing our weekly walks, conversations about current events, how I helped her repair her fence last month. "She said you carried the ladder yourself," Benjamin said with a smile. I laughed softly, but my heart was aching, because preparing for this meant remembering everything, the good and the betrayals. I found myself staring at old journals, entries I had written 5-6 years ago, glimpses into moments I had forgotten, like Matthew calling me at midnight for help with his taxes, Emily crying on my porch after her divorce. All those times they needed me. I never questioned. I just showed up. And now I had to prove I was still worthy of showing up for myself. Benjamin added another folder to the pile. "Cognitive assessment results came back. You're sharp, within completely normal range." Relief washed over me, but it didn't last. "They'll say it's incomplete. That one test isn't enough. They're going to lean on anecdotal stories, ones you can't disprove without witnesses." I nodded. I understood now. This wasn't about facts. This was about perception. And that terrified me. We prepared my testimony next. I practiced saying things I never imagined I'd have to say under oath. I know my name. I know what day it is. I know who I am. But the most painful part was rereading Matthew's petition. In it, he listed moments I had forgotten, dates I confused, names I mixed up, conversations I supposedly repeated. Some were true, but others exaggerated, taken out of context, twisted into something shameful. At one point I whispered, "Why would he do this?" Benjamin didn't answer. He didn't need to, because somewhere between trust and control, something had shifted in my children. And now I had to stand before a judge and beg to be seen. Not as a memory fading, but as a woman still alive. The courthouse smelled like old paper and cold air. My bracelet felt heavier than usual, its silver cool against my wrist, the anchor pendant resting on my pulse like a question. Will they hear me? Will they see me? I sat beside Benjamin at the petitioner's hearing, the room quiet except for the occasional shuffle of documents and the murmur of lawyers. Across from me sat Matthew and Emily, dressed in muted tones, their eyes not meeting mine. They looked like strangers. No, worse, they looked like prosecutors. The judge, a tall, composed woman, with a stern face and thoughtful eyes, entered and called the session to order. Benjamin stood to introduce my case, stating calmly, "This is not a matter of incapacity. It is a matter of misunderstanding, and perhaps ambition." The judge raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Then came Matthew. He walked to the front of the courtroom, a stack of notes in his hand. "Your Honor," he began, voice smooth. "We love our mother, but love sometimes means making hard choices. Over the past year, she has demonstrated consistent confusion, misplaced bills, missed appointments, repeating conversations. We found her refrigerator empty for days. She once drove to the pharmacy and forgot why she was there." He looked back at me. "She's not safe, and she refuses help." Emily followed. Her voice broke at the start, just enough to sound sincere. "We don't want to take her freedom. We want to protect her before something tragic happens." They submitted evidence, copies of bank overdrafts, affidavits from friends of theirs, a voicemail I had left months ago, where my voice was slurred from a medication adjustment. It all sounded damning, especially out of context. The judge listened, nodding occasionally, eyes unreadable. Benjamin leaned in and whispered, "They rehearsed this." I kept my hands folded in my lap, but my heart was climbing my throat, not from fear, from betrayal. I wanted to scream. Where were you when I drove myself to every appointment, when I hosted birthdays alone after Dad died, when I memorized every grandchild's allergies, school schedules, and favorite bedtime story? But the court doesn't listen to motherhood, only to evidence. When the judge called for a short recess, Benjamin stood. "It's our turn next," he said quietly. "Stay strong." I nodded, but as I looked across the courtroom, at my son and daughter smiling softly, as if they were heroes in a tragedy they had written themselves, I realized something. This wasn't just about the law. It was about dignity, and I would not let them take it from me. When we returned from recess, the courtroom felt different, heavier. I could see it in the way the judge leaned forward slightly, as if bracing for impact. And that's exactly what Benjamin delivered. "Our client," he began, "is not merely competent. She is being deliberately misrepresented by her own children for reasons we believe are as much about power as they are about perception." He presented my cognitive assessment, clear, recent, and signed by a board-certified neurologist. Then came the stack of character letters. Janice's described our morning walks, conversations about politics and local news. Tom, the pharmacist, submitted a retraction, saying he had been misled. Even the mailman provided a statement, noting I never missed a bill and always remembered his name. The courtroom was silent. Then Benjamin called me to the stand. As I approached the witness box, the bracelet slid slightly down my wrist, its anchor swinging. I took that as a sign. Stay grounded. He began gently. Can you tell us your full name? Margaret Ellen Whitmore. And today's date? October 17th, Thursday. Where are we? Denver County Courthouse, Family Division, Courtroom 2B. He smiled. Then he asked, "Why do you believe this guardianship was filed?" I paused. My throat tightened, but I found my voice. Because I made the mistake of aging in front of people who don't know how to do it themselves. Soft murmurs rippled through the room. I continued, voice steady. I'm not confused. I'm not broken. I've had moments of fatigue like anyone. I've repeated stories like anyone. But I pay my bills. I manage my medications. I take care of myself. What I haven't done is surrender. Benjamin stepped back. Then it was time for our expert witness, Dr. Karen Leffler, the neurologist, took the stand. She had reviewed every detail: interviews, memory tests, attention span, language recall. Does Miss Whitmore meet any clinical criteria for cognitive incapacity? None. In fact, her scores are above average for her age group. What would you say about the claims made by her children? They are anecdotal and not supported by formal assessment. Matthew fidgeted in his seat. Emily avoided eye contact. Then Benjamin dropped the final card. Financial records showing years of voluntary support. Money I had given them without hesitation. Her children, who now claim she's unfit, had no issue receiving tens of thousands of dollars from her over the past decade. The judge's pen froze. The room felt like it had just exhaled. We rested our case. The judge looked over her notes, asked a few clarifying questions. Her expression remained calm, but I sensed a shift, a subtle recalibration of the truth. As court adjourned for final deliberation, Benjamin turned to me and whispered, "You held your ground." I nodded, because for the first time in weeks I didn't just feel like a defendant. I felt like myself again. We returned to the courtroom 2 days later. I don't remember the weather. I don't remember what I wore. I only remember the way my heart beat. Not like fear, but like defiance. Matthew and Emily sat to my right, whispering between themselves. I didn't look at them. I looked at the judge. She entered quietly, her robe flowing like the weight of the decision she carried. "This court," she began, "has reviewed all submitted evidence, including medical documentation, financial records, character testimonies, and in-person evaluations." A pause. My breath held. The bracelet on my wrist pulsed with memory. "With history, with hope." She continued, "I find no sufficient grounds to appoint a guardian over Ms. Margaret Whitmore. She has demonstrated full cognitive competence and the ability to manage her personal and financial affairs." The words didn't register at first. I blinked, frozen. Then she turned, looking directly at Matthew and Emily. "What concerns me most is the pattern of manipulation observed in this case. This petition, in my view, was not filed out of love, but out of control and entitlement." She addressed the court clerk. "Let the record show this was a misuse of legal process." Benjamin gently touched my arm. "You won," he whispered. But it didn't feel like a victory. Not yet, because I turned to look at my children. Matthew's face was pale, his jaw tight. Emily stared straight ahead, refusing to meet my eyes. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt sorrow, the kind of sorrow that can only exist between a mother and the children she once believed would carry her with dignity. The judge ended the session. I stood slowly, every muscle in my body aching. Not from age, but from surviving something I never thought I'd have to survive. The betrayal of my own blood. As we exited the courtroom, reporters outside asked questions. I ignored them. I held Benjamin's arm, the corridor long and empty ahead of us. At the steps, I paused. "I didn't win," I said quietly. "I just didn't lose everything." He nodded. Sometimes that's the most anyone can ask for. And as we walked into the light of the courthouse doors, I realized something. They had tried to take my voice, my choices, my history, but I still had one thing they couldn't legislate: my truth. It's been 6 months since the ruling. The house is quieter now, but not empty. I've filled it with something new: myself. The living room where I once defended my sanity is now a space of color and light. I took up painting, something I hadn't done since college. My first piece. A single silver anchor floating above a soft blue sea. It hangs in the hallway across from the mirror where I once doubted who I was. I travel more now, short trips. Nothing extravagant. A weekend in Santa Fe to see the desert bloom. A visit to Chicago to meet an old friend from nursing school. I even took a watercolor class in the mountains. And with every mile, I leave behind the woman they thought I had become. I've started donating to women's legal advocacy groups, quietly, consistently, because there are others like me, mothers, aunts, grandmothers, whose voices are being stolen under the mask of concern. My notebook, the one Benjamin gave me, is now full. Not with evidence, but with reflections, with memories, with affirmations like, "You are still allowed to want. You are not a burden. You are still here." Sometimes I sit on the porch at dusk, bracelet around my wrist, anchor resting against my skin, and I think of Daniel. What he would have said. I think he would have been proud. Not because I fought back, but because I remembered who I was before the world tried to convince me otherwise. The children haven't called since the verdict, and maybe they won't. I still leave the porch light on. Not out of hope, but out of habit. Because loving someone doesn't mean losing yourself for them. It means knowing when to draw the line. And I have, finally. So if you're out there, sitting in your own quiet room, doubting your memory, your worth, your voice, listen to me. You are not invisible. You are not finished. And if I can reclaim my life at 68, so can you. Some people say setting boundaries is the end of love. But I've learned the opposite is true. Boundaries are how love survives. Real love. Not the kind that manipulates. Not the kind that makes you prove your worth over and over. The kind that says, "I see you. I still see you. I still wear the bracelet every day." Not because I need the reminder, but because it survived everything with me. Like I did. They haven't apologized. There's been no letter, no call, no knock at the door. And I've made peace with that. Because forgiveness, I've come to understand, doesn't always need an audience. Sometimes it's something you give quietly, to yourself. I forgave them the moment I stood in that courtroom and told the truth out loud. Not because they deserved it, but because I did. Today my life is smaller, but it's honest. And I'd rather live in a quiet truth than a loud lie. To anyone watching this, if you've ever been made to feel small by the very people you raised, if your history has been weaponized against you, if your dignity has been questioned behind closed doors, let this story be your reminder. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to protect what's yours. You are allowed to fight for your name, your voice, your life. Because love without respect isn't love, and care without consent isn't care. Limits don't kill love. They reveal who really knows how to love you. So now I turn the question to you. What would you have done? Have you ever had to choose between your peace and your children's approval? comment below and tell me where you're watching from, and if this story touched something deep in you. Don't forget to subscribe, because this isn't just my story, it's ours.